Hey, welcome to the Autism Broadcast Network. My name is J.R. with Toni Boucher. And we're in now month number 2 of living an authentic autistic life in 2022. And we thought that we would take this month and look at families and kids. Because, yes, this is geared more towards adults, but guess what? The kids are going to grow up into these people, into us. And Toni, I think you especially have a really interesting viewpoint on this, as you're both on the spectrum and the parent of somebody on the spectrum.
Yeah, and I was thinking about that today, since we are going to be, having this conversation about how we really need to come together as a community and support, all family members, all parents. And, those of us on the spectrum have some unique advantages of being autistic and raising autistic kids, but we also have some disadvantages that our neurotypical counterparts do not have. For example, today, and this will segue us into the conversation, I was helping my son with his speech therapy, and he was supposed to determine if he should only think a thought or if he could speak it out loud. And so there were several examples. And I, as an autistic person, quite frankly, didn't have the answers. Like, I was like, well, I would say all of this.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you if you could send me a copy of that when you're done.
I will.
I still need
it. So I'm going to have to go back to his speech therapist, because we have a very autistic and sensory friendly and honest family. And so I was really at a disadvantage to where the speech therapist would have been going with that. And I'm going to have to defer to someone else who has a little bit, more expertise in that. And so, yeah, it's, as parents, we have to look at where our strengths are and then get support from the community and from others in areas where we need it. So I'm really excited to have this conversation tonight with these two really beautiful and wonderful
let's bring
ladies.
Them on. We have Cynthia from Missouri, the Texas County Autism Connection, and she's a parent advocate. And Jenna Gensic, who is also a parent advocate and an author of a brand new book coming out on the 21st. Correct?
Thank you. Yep. Thank you for having us.
All right. Well, Jenna, why don't you start off and just kind of introduce yourself? And
Sure. My name is Jenna Gensic. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a neurotypical mother of 4. I have my oldest son has been diagnosed with autism, as has my younger brother, was diagnosed with Asperger's when that label was still being used. So my son that is diagnosed autistic is almost 14. He was diagnosed at the age of 4. And I created a website a while ago called learnfromautistics.com, where I just try to reach out to the autistic community and kind of let their voice and advice on topics of a variety of all kinds of different topics, so that parents and caregivers, either neurotypical or neurodiverse, can kind of come and just kind of find a hub for what autistic advocates are saying. And so I'm trying to focus my efforts on that.
And the book that's coming out is kind of part of that website.
Yeah. I recently finished a book with Dr. Jennifer Elizabeth Brunton, who is neurodiverse, and she worked with me to write a book. It's called The Actually Autistic Guide to Advocacy, and it's advice on to give people either neurodiverse or neurotypical advice to help them ally with and speak up with the autistic community. So it interviews over 100 autistic people, and it compiles their advice on what people are doing well in autism advocacy and where they think the missteps are. So I just started getting really curious about some mistakes that I learned that I had been making based on what I had been hearing from the autistic community. And I just thought, oh my gosh, like I had been studying autism for several years, and I thought, if I'm still learning, I know that other people probably would benefit from this. So these are people who are well-intentioned. It's for people who are well-intentioned and want to help They just either might be doing things that maybe aren't exactly aligned with the autistic community, or they may be way off. But it's people who want to help and trying to give advice to kind of get them centered with the autistic community. But it's a huge, diverse community, as we all know. So not everybody is going to agree, but we're just trying to focus on very autism positive things.
Yep. And I was one of those 100 people.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, yes.
And Cynthia, I first met you when I was helping your family at an IEP meeting. And now you've really taken over.
Well, actually, no, I haven't. No, I'm still constantly reaching out to several others, and I reached out to you not too long ago.
Yeah.
On other things, not necessarily IEP related, but yes,
Yeah.
I'm mom to 7-year-old little boy, and he was diagnosed with autism about 4 years ago. And I have just kind of became enraptured with the autistic community for obvious reasons. Just wanting to learn and support my son and help him live, the life that best suits him, and help support seeing his life fulfilled. And then, of course, being a little bit of a micromanaging control freak, overly helpful in an annoying way.
I did not figure that out at the IEP meeting, by the way.
I kind of seem to have gotten myself involved here and there in different places. One of those places being, to my great honor, being a family advocate with Echo Autism Communities, which is kind of a project of the Thompson Center in Columbia, Missouri. And the basic premise is just helping to connect people and kind of spread that awareness, acceptance, authenticity, to help everyone, not just those in the autistic community, but to help everyone live the best life that we can. And with a little extra emphasis on what it takes for a community to support a person with autism in the best ways. And so it's been really near and dear to my heart. We're starting on our 3rd year with that. And with that came Texas County Autism Connection. It's basically just a private Facebook group because it started right before the pandemic. And so we weren't able to really grow beyond that. But it's a lot of local individuals and families, and then a few like yourself, JR, that we've been able to connect with just to kind of help as a guide and a resource, and be able to connect. And it's just been really interesting and eye-opening, really, to see how many families in our small rural area are truly touched by autism.
Well, see, that's what I wanted to point out. You're in a very rural area, so these resources of which you speak aren't readily available in places like Charlotte County, right?
Yes. Our town is a population of 2,000. There's nothing but 15 miles of farmland between the next population, and the closest population center is about 45 miles to 90 miles, depending on where you go. And even those communities, you're talking tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands, but they still have limited resources and wait lists for the resources that they do offer. So yeah, we've got a little bit of a unique situation here, and really the heart and soul of it is just trying to connect people, not only with resources, but with each other. We all have lived experience that we're all going to share tonight. And we don't all have all the answers, but we do all have experience that we can share, and each of us can take, from each other what we feel like we can apply, and hopefully just, take that next step. So.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Toni, why don't I want to start the first one with you, because again, you've got that unique viewpoint of both being on the spectrum and then being the parent of a child on the spectrum. pressures and judgments from people. What
Yeah.
have you experienced, and what should be done?
Yeah, I think, Cynthia and I were having a conversation when we first got to meet to talk about this, about how, when you first, get a diagnosis, you've got all of this information coming in at you. And, Cynthia can share more about her experience in a little bit. I think it's really touching and people will relate to it. But you're just getting so much information from everybody about what you should be doing and what you shouldn't be doing. And, I remember when my daughter was just really little, and she was one of those kids who had such tremendous sensory overload. She couldn't go into a restaurant or a Walmart because it completely overloaded her, and she would just melt down and kick and scream. And, there's all that pressure of people looking and thinking you're a bad parent, and here you are trying your best, and people are judging what you're doing and thinking you should be doing something else. And so it really, I think, puts parents into a position of really feeling paralyzed and powerless. And I think that's really the theme I sense, in my own experience as a parent, and, when I work with families, is really having, this sense that, no matter what I do, it's going to be wrong. And I really hope that tonight we can help, families out there who are feeling that, to really find some ways to, emotionally and cognitively step outside of that, and give themselves some freedom to really follow what's in their hearts. As parents, your children, better than, us experts out there telling you what to do. And a lot of times your instinct, what you know in your heart, is, you're that best advocate for those little ones who are not able to speak for themselves yet. And so it's really important to listen to your intuition and your gut for yourself as a parent, to give yourself that ability to function, but also as a model for your child, because one of the most challenging things your child will probably deal with growing up is learning to listen to themselves and follow through with what's right for them, regardless of what society's telling them. So to set those healthy boundaries is, J.R., because you've been there with, people crossing your boundaries. It's just part of the, the lesson. So,
and then me crossing other people's boundaries, not even realizing I was crossing those boundaries.
Absolutely. So making those boundaries clear both ways is really important. Yeah.
Yeah. And I do want to mention, though, if people want to ask questions or make comments, please leave them in the comment section and we'll address them. Cynthia, what about you? Coming from a very rural perspective, where Toni's coming from a very urban perspective.
Well, like we kind of touched on, we don't have a lot of local resources, which that's actually true for a lot of different areas of life for rural people. We're kind of used to driving 15, 20 miles out of town for any given thing. But it becomes an extra burden when it is healthcare, and most especially when it is healthcare for specific disabilities and specialties. And so we were very, very fortunate that Carson's pediatrician, even though located about 45 miles away, was an echo autism provider. I didn't know that at the time. But basically what happened was he was about 2.5 years old, and my angel baby, as I would, kind of say, would just have these extreme moments. And some of them were considerably more mild than some of the quote unquote horror stories that, ones might have heard from time to time. But they were just so outside of rationale, and it was one of those situations where, like Toni talked about, I was so overwhelmed. I felt so judged. I felt so pressured. I felt so stressed. It was significantly impacting the health of our entire family. We have 3 other children. It was beginning to impact. I could feel my relationship with my son, and it was becoming too much. And when I would reach out to those who were close to me, well-meaning people, oh, well, he's just a boy, you're just not used to well, I do have a boy, you know, and I've got more than one son, and then, you know, well, you know, he's a strong-willed, or maybe you need to use a sticker chart, and things like that, and just knowing that our home environment is relatively healthy and stable, and you know, we didn't have you know, in extreme situations to deal with, and so I reached out, and thankfully Dr. Boyji said, let's just talk. And through our conversation, which I just knew that she would think I was a crazy person and I needed to just go home and take a bubble bath. But she didn't react that way at all. She said, you know, a few of the things that you're saying, you know, indicate possible autism, which was foreign to me. She said, you know, I don't know that that's where we'll end up. She said, but if you're comfortable, I think we could at least do a screening and just see where we go, see what answers we find along the way. And I think that that's the best thing that really anyone on the planet could do for any other person, is just say, you know what, let's pick a target and let's just see where that takes us. If it's a yes or a no, really doesn't matter. It's what we'll learn by going through that. But anyway, so we were fortunate enough that through the Echo Autism program, we received a decision on a diagnosis within 3 months of the screening, 5 months from the day that I emailed her just with my concerns. And that's unheard of. And that's a whole other conversation. But that program was built around the need for rural access to specifically diagnosis, and then now years later care. And if not for that, I can tell you that my family would very likely not be today because of the stress that it imparted on us. And so, of course, for my situation, I know everyone deals with receiving diagnosis differently. For me, it was a relief. For me, it was, okay, so my son is not a bad person. I am not a bad mom. And this is something that people know about. So I can learn this. And like, this isn't necessarily going to be easy, but I can learn this and I can do this. So I put my Google researcher hat on and I took to trying to learn anything and everything that I could. And of course, as we all know, the internet is fraught with misinformation. And we'll talk some about some of those things. So I'll just kind of skip ahead, but it was very overwhelming. It created a lot of doubt. You know, I suddenly had confidence that I could parent and support my son well because we had this knowledge. And then all of a sudden it felt like everything was ripped out from under me because I had this voice and this paper and that doctor. You know, when doctors don't agree, it's hard for your average citizen, your average parent to know how to navigate things. And so it was an extra level of stress that was added that I really feel like we in the autism, you know, community, we who are touched by the autism community can do a better job of supporting each other when people are entering this space and helping to guide them a little more gently. And so that was kind of how things kind of initially went for us. We are now, like I said, 4 years post-diagnosis. Carson does have 3 other diagnoses, but he is, as far as I can tell, he's happy and well-adjusted and stable and living his best little 7-year-old life with his dog and his snow and his WWE action figures that he can tell you everything about. You know, and there are days like this morning, you know, it started off really, really rough for him and evidently for a lot of other folks. And there are days that are a lot harder to navigate than others, but we've kind of found our rhythm for this season, knowing that different seasons of life can bring about different challenges. But I feel like at this point, we have, as a family, the confidence to know where to go to get the kind of support we need. We might not necessarily always know what the path ahead is or what the next step is or what the answer is, but we do know who we can reach out to, and that those people will support us and will help guide us to what it is that we need. And I think that's what we all need. And it's definitely what I feel like that this group wants for everyone. So I hope that we can help someone with that today.
Sorry about that. I turned my microphone off because my dog was scratching a minute ago and I forgot that I turned it off. Jenna, this is a good question, I think, for you with the research and things that you've done. What are some of the challenges to living an authentic autistic life that you faced or been asked about?
Well, I mean, I can only speak from the perspective of a neurotypical parent, and trying to allow my son, I guess, to live an authentic autistic life.
Yeah, but you're still part of that authentic autistic life for him. So
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I feel very grateful to have kind of learned to use the autistic community as my compass from when my son was an early age. I too was overwhelmed with just the barrage of advice. Like right when he was diagnosed, my son was born very early though, so he was very premature, 3 months, 1 pound 12 ounces, and so he had a whole host of medical issues. Aside from the possible autism diagnosis. So at different points in his life, we were like, well, is he delayed because of this, or is there something else going on? So the diagnosis could have been earlier, but it was late for that reason. But we were kind of blessed with I think, a really fabulous speech therapist from very early on that just was very interested in teaching my son, uh, like how to be his own person and how to communicate his needs, and she was not forceful at all. And we've gone through slews of therapists for a variety of different therapies, and I just know that that's pretty rare. And so we were very fortunate. Right about the time that he was diagnosed, he had this really great speech therapist that um if he was expressing dislike of something, or something was too much, she would, whatever, however he was doing that, whether it was verbally or not verbally or whatever it was, she would totally respect that. Oh, looks like that's too much. Okay, let's stop. And then she also is the one that urged us to seek out a diagnosis, because she thought he was hyperlexic at the time. He was 2 and wouldn't speak to anybody, but he could read full sentences in books. And so, but she was the one that also said, hey, you know what? And my son had also been just diagnosed with cerebral palsy. So my husband and I were a little overwhelmed with this idea that he might also have this other diagnosis. And she said, you know what? He's still going to be the same kid, whether this happens and there's a name for it. It's still the same kid. Nothing is going to magically change about him. And I was just like, oh gosh, of course, you're right. Like, just because there's a name for it doesn't mean that my son's any different. So that was like 10 years ago. So I think that was a good foundation for me to realize, like, that I can help him live this authentic life. And from that, it really was for me just starting to read the accounts of autistic adults, because I was getting so much advice and I didn't know what to do. I mean, I had people telling me all sorts of things. One thing that I got very stressed about was this 10 years ago. I mean, it's still around, but 10 years ago, casein-free diet was like a really big thing to try. So I was told, if you get your kid off milk, then he'll be like a whole different person. And my son, as a result of his prematurity, had some eating disorders. He had a G tube for a long time, and Pediasure was the only way we got him off of the G tube to keep him alive by himself. So it was such a big victory for him to be able to feed himself and independently learn when he was hungry. And so then I was being told that the milk that he was given was was bad for him, and I was like, I can't handle this. So anyway, reading a lot of what autistic adults were saying was helpful to me, because I thought, okay, these people are telling me what they think is right, but what if I just like ask people what worked or what didn't work for them? And I learned just some really important things, like I think honestly one of the most foundational things that I learned is about eye contact, because I had therapists that were forcing him to have eye contact, and he was just learning to speak, but they wouldn't respond to him until he looked up at them and made eye contact, like, for him. And
oh, I want to
I
start with people.
I was, well, yeah. And once we found out, I was, thankfully I had read enough about it that I was just not okay with that, and we ended the program. But I I've read so much about it now, and it's like, oh gosh, like, just learning about these autism neutral behaviors. So, like, what can I learn about and what is going on in my life an expectation that I have for my kids that isn't really positive or negative. It's just neutral. But because I do it all the time, I expect my kids to do it. And eye contact was one of those things. It's like, oh, yeah, you don't need to look me in the eye, because when you look me in the eye, you're so uncomfortable and you can't communicate well. And so I learned that very quickly. And I feel like some small things like that, they seem small, but I learned them when he was very young. And I was so grateful for that, because he's really had several years in our house where it's okay to do all those autism neutral things. Like, those aren't bad in our house. Like, it's okay if you need to go over here and not speak to anybody for a while. It's okay if you're unaware that everybody is in the house right now. Even though we've all been here together, it's okay if you are kind of in your own space doing your own thing. It's okay if you need time on your iPad. I know screen time, we want to put some limits on it, but it's okay if right now that's what you need to do to be centered because of what else is going on right now. And I'm trying to teach him, he's going into high school next year, so I'm trying to teach him to be comfortable advocating, in the school himself, like learning about himself so he can communicate what he needs comfortably to somebody else, because I'm not always going to be there. Right now, I help him a lot in those ways, but he's actually on a weekend retreat for the first time with a church group, and he hasn't been on anything like this before. And so we were talking about like what do you want me to tell these adults at the retreat ahead of time that you're comfortable with, or would you like to say something, or would you like me to say nothing at all? So this idea of giving him like power over his own life, like it's not just me ordering him around, like what I need to take your lead whenever possible. And I think that's probably how I try to let him be authentic. If he's not hurting anybody, there's no reason why he doesn't need to be doing X, Y, or Z.
Yeah, and it's not even so much hurting people as sometimes just people are confused because they don't understand. And if they would take a moment to let you explain it to them, it'd be so much easier.
Right.
Right. I work with a lot of folks who were trained, they're in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and they were trained to make that eye contact as children. And we're having to unlearn it. Because instead of it feeling natural and being a, kind of a flowy thing, there's too much intensity now. It's like, I worked so hard to learn how to, look at you in the eyes, and it doesn't feel natural. And so then they're staring people down, and it's, it's not comfortable for that other person. And so, yeah, I love your term neutral, because nobody gets hurt if I look at your mouth, it just, instead of your eyes, or if I look off to the side.
And the conversation's better for everybody, because
for everyone,
people communicate more effectively.
And there are lots of cultures. I spent a lot of time working with some beautiful Native American folks, and it was respectful to look down when you were listening, and it helped to really focus the attention on the voice and the message that was coming forth. So it's a cultural thing. It's not a not a human thing. It's just a cultural preference.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just got a message from somebody in the Netherlands who we're going to talk to in a couple months. Her name is Brenda. She works with autistic girls and women that have eating disorders, and she stuck with us until 12:30 in the morning. And she said she'd finish watching this when she got up tomorrow. So we're bringing them in from Europe.
Great.
So, Jenna, your milk story kind of got me headed towards another topic we were going to talk about anyway. And Cynthia, I want to start with you. Is some of the fear tactics and the fear that is spread among parents of autistic kids?
Oh my gosh, yes. Yes. I remember sitting in bed looking through different things, and a Facebook ad popped up with a video that, of course, appeared to be just from a normal family like mine. And their son had gone from completely nonverbal and self-harming to couldn't tell him from anyone else in class in 3 months for chelation, and and not saying that may not have been their experience, anything like that.
As an autistic person, I'll tell you, it wasn't their experience.
Well, it's one of those things where for everything. And actually I had this conversation with someone earlier today. Anything that you want to, any question that you want to ask or any answer that you seek, you can find it. Now, is it the best answer? Is it the most appropriate? Is it the safest? Is it, the most scientifically, medically sound? Is it the most common answer? All of those kinds of things. But with the information access that we have in today's world, there's just a lot of things. I can find a case to validate any given statement that I want to make. But is that one case? Can it be replicated? All of those things that we know. And again, not to negate anyone's desire to see their loved one be able to speak and express themselves, not to negate anyone's desire to see their loved one be able to live independently, to be able to self-care. And we all, I feel like, have that. And there's nothing wrong with a parent who's going, I will do anything. I will do anything to support my child. I will do anything to provide them an independent life that they can live fully, authentically. I'll if it means a casein-free diet, if it means, whatever, I'm willing to do whatever it takes to do that for them. That heart is in the right place. But that fear mongering and that taking advantage, it's too prevalent. It is far too prevalent. And personally, I feel like that the best advice that I could probably give someone when they're faced with something like that is to probably just really move on. I mean, I'm in marketing, and so I know the Facebook algorithms. You can see these ads come up, and you can put an angry face, but that's a reaction. You can put a comment saying, this isn't scientifically founded, or this, has injured several autistic individuals, or, whatever. And that's engagement, to the algorithms. And there's only so much monitoring of those kinds of things. Definitely reporting things that are dangerous, reporting things that are spam, reporting things that are fear mongering. I think that there's a place for that, because that's the only way really to bring it to an appropriate placement, an appropriate representation of things that can help. Any individual that's having gastrointestinal issues may benefit from a diet change, whether they're autistic or not. What that diet change is and how it plays out in their life, those are unique and need to be hopefully the individual and their physician can coordinate on those things and what those things can be. But I think that the best advice I could really give to a parent is anything, whether it's something that someone says, even if it's something I say, something that someone says or an ad that you see, if the first thing that you feel rise up in you is fear, is that pause, just pause. There can sometimes be an appropriate reason to fear something for your child. But more often than not, it is someone that just doesn't have the best intentions. Or if they maybe have had, they've gone off track. And if our goal is to give our child the absolute best support that we can to help them live the best life that they can, then we're going to be a little trigger happy once in a while. But wisdom, causes us to prudently pause and really consider, because no matter what the challenges in our lives, I think that most of us can agree there's usually not a quick fix. There's usually not an easy road to something better. It usually takes a little bit of time and it takes a little bit of effort. Whether that's something as small, seemingly, as not requiring eye contact, or something as big as completely changing your vocabulary to be able to communicate better with someone, because that's what it takes, learning a different language, essentially. But that's just kind of based on the experiences that I've had and things I've seen. The fear mongering is it's rough. It's really rough.
Yeah, and Toni, for all of us who are advocating, I think we almost always tell people, look at stuff from parents of autistic kids, look at stuff from people that are on the spectrum themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But then, like Cynthia pointed out, you've got these people that are taking that stand as the parents and creating these fake ads.
I think that it's really important to make the distinction between wanting your child to be the best person that they're meant to be, reaching their potential, being healthy, addressing any co-occurring, diagnoses. That's different than wanting them to be a different person. And it's really important, I think, for us as parents to be really clear and sound that we have these unique, beautiful souls that we're entrusted to care for and support and bring out into the world in the best possible way. But it's not for us to make them something that they're not. And so I just think that's a really important distinction. And in talking with lots of, folks on the spectrum, they will say, please help me with my co-occurring diagnoses, help me with my gut issues, help me with, if I've got allergies or whatever, but let me be me, let me be the person I was meant to be. And for many, many people, the autism is so linked and infused into everything that they are. It's a part of our identity. We don't want that taken out.
But Toni, that's the thing to point out. It's a part of our identity. It's not who we are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's infused with all the other pieces of who we are, and yeah.
But sometimes people that are outside of the autism community see it as an identification.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times it's seen as something to overcome or to, to beat or to win, and I think that neither of those things is probably, a healthy stance.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bacchus says gut feeling is a better indicator than people give it credit for. And I think that's so true. I mean, I loved your litmus test, Cynthia, for if it feels like you're coming from a place of fear, that's your check to say, whoa, let me take a step back and just sit with this and see if this is really a decision that I'm doing because it's in the best interest, or is it something where I'm reacting?
Yeah. And I think oftentimes parents that may have taken a non-traditional course to support their child and seen benefits and success, I think sometimes they just get passionate and they want to share that. I mean, I know I get passionate and want to share our successes, but what worked for me or what worked for my family or what worked for my child isn't always going to translate to you or your family or your child. And that's one that can be a really hard line to walk, because you want to share and impart because you want to support and encourage and you want to walk with someone through this journey. But at the same time, it's not gospel. It's just not. If my son benefits from a diet, it doesn't mean that your daughter will. It doesn't in any way, shape, form, or fashion, even if diagnoses are the same and the symptoms are the same.
Yeah.
We see it all the time. Medical research has proven, our uniqueness as individuals, it's in our cells. We
Mm-hmm.
can't predict every single outcome. So anytime that I try to guard myself, that anytime I give advice, that I try to measure it more as, I've seen this, whether it was me or another person, I've seen this, and what you're saying sounds like it could be that. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's an avenue for you to investigate, period.
Yeah.
That's all. And again, where individuals need to have a say and need to be able to self-identify those things for themselves, of how it feels and how it impacts their life physically, medically, emotionally, mentally. And be able to speak up, because just because something works medically doesn't mean it's going to work mentally. If it brings on depression, if it brings on stress, is it worth it? And that's a choice that each individual has to make.
Yeah, well, I think that's something Toni and I could, talk about just from us being diagnosed so late in life. Is, we felt like we had to fall in line, so to speak, at least to a point, and now we realize we really shouldn't have been doing that.
It was to our detriment, like health wise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I think.
Go ahead.
I think it's really important for parents to recognize too. It does not benefit our families to be like sacrificial lambs. It benefits our families to role model setting the healthy boundaries. It benefits our families when we take good care of ourselves, when we model what we hope for our children. I would never want my child to sacrifice their health for, for something. I want my child to really learn to be healthy and to set boundaries. So if I'm like sacrificing myself, I'm not setting up the example for my child, for them to go out in the world and be healthy. And another thing JR and I can attest to is how observant we are, and how because sometimes the world is so confusing, we're going to mimic. If we don't understand, what people are saying, we don't understand the humor, why people are doing things, we can still copy, and that we're going to imitate what we see. And so that is a really powerful stance for us as parents, is to say, I'm going to be, taking care of my mental health, and I'm going to be as solid and healthy a person as I can be.
Yeah. So Jenna, I want to ask, since you've got the most experience of being an autism parent here, because you said yours is going into high school.
Will be, yeah, almost 14.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So kind of, talk us through kind of over the years, the way that he set his boundaries and you've helped him set his boundaries. And, you said you've already started talking about, him advocating for himself in certain situations.
Mm-hmm. At the very beginning, it was difficult because he was very compliant, just a naturally compliant person. I don't know that that was trained into him at a really early age, but he just was interested in things and would just go along with things. And so any idea of a new therapy that someone mentioned was like, oh, okay, yeah, we should be doing that too. Okay, we'll do that too. And he was my first too. So I had all my attention to just focus on him. And I had just quit my teaching job. So because he was on a ventilator at first. So we really didn't have any babysitters. Daycare wasn't an option. So I had quit my job and I was just taking care of him. So I had all my time just to focus on what he needed. So I just started piling things on, and that was my life. We went from, speech therapy to occupational therapy to this to that. And I do remember when he started school, it was probably kindergarten, first grade. I do remember this time where I just started thinking, and we had gone from therapy to therapy. We kind of found ones that we thought we didn't like, and then we kind of stuck with a couple therapists we did like. But I do remember thinking at some point, being like, you know what, and I'm not sure how that light bulb turned on exactly, but I remember thinking, I can still be a good mom and we don't have to go to therapy 5 days a week. Like, this is not what he has to have to be in the best possible. And I don't remember exactly how I got to that. I think it might have been just wearisome after a while, but I think he was starting to be able to say that he liked one thing over another, or he was showing some preferences in therapies. So I was like, okay, what is he really getting out of that? Does he need it or not? And again, he wasn't walking for a really long time, so he had a lot of physical therapy that was on top of these other therapies. So I do remember that light bulb going off and being like, okay, I am going to accept that this is healthier for us to get rid of half of our schedule, and he's still going to be fine, and he's still going to be great. And that's when I started to, I think, read his cues a little bit more carefully than what I had been doing before. Because when they're really young, it's really difficult. You're kind of making all those choices for them. But then I just constantly kept getting rewarded with doing that. And so I think I slowly started to give him more and more control. Like I remember when he was in younger elementary school, so he could walk, but he uses AFOs, ankle foot orthotics, and he has a very awkward gait, and he's able to run, but it's very slower than his peers. But I remember his school, he brought home a flyer. It was for a running club, and I didn't say anything. I just assumed he wouldn't want to do it. And then it was the day before it was due, and he's like, "Mom, have you filled this out?" And I was like, "Oh no, you want to do it? Sure." And I thought okay, I signed him up for it, and I just thought to myself that he was going to be embarrassed or that he wouldn't want to do it. And he has been running cross country ever since. And I felt like that was like so awful of me to assume that he wasn't going to be interested in that. And honestly, and that's what he does now. He runs. He's run cross country for 3 years at his middle school, and he's finished every race, and he's been last every time, but he has loved it because he's just working on something for himself. And I just remember I was like, why did I have that initial feeling that he wouldn't want to do it? And it's like, it's because it's it might have been how I would have felt in his situation. That doesn't mean that's how he's going to feel. So I think I've just tried to slowly put him more and more in control of his life plan, whether that's just making choices about extracurricular activities, or if it's like a specific therapy he wants. Like, okay, how do you feel about physical therapy? Is this something, I mean, we know you need to keep your range so that you can keep running. Is this something you wanted to keep doing in person, or should we be doing more at home? And his speech therapy too, I remember just he can speak, and he's been able to communicate so that we can all hear him fine, but there's still some sounds that he struggles with. And I remember a new speech therapist recommending, another program. I was like, you know what, like, he's fine. Like, he gets along fine, and to be taking him out of school or making him miss an after school activity so that we can work on his S's and Z's a little bit more. I just eventually got to a point where I could kind of figure that out. But I think it's tough because there's a lot of pressure to be in certain therapies for a certain length of time. And I think uh, I think as soon as he was able to communicate, or I was able to better read his cues, I don't want to say that I just got rid of some therapies and that was like the perfect solution, but he was able to articulate what we wanted, and kind of put him in the driver's seat a little more for that.
I love that, because our kids have a right to make mistakes. And
Yeah.
like we're here to like help guide them through their decisions. Like, that's every human right, is to, have preferences and make choices and figure out what worked and what didn't. And so I love that story about you letting him go and run and make those decisions about therapy. I'm feeling a little like viscerally overwhelmed whenever I hear people talk about their young kids getting like days and days of therapy in the week, because as a kid, and even today, I needed so much downtime. Like, that would have completely overwhelmed me. And even today, like, I'm a grown adult, a professional woman, and I don't work a 40-hour week because it wouldn't work for me. I would just be completely overwhelmed. So when I hear about kids, being able to make decisions about, which therapies, or even if it's not a therapy, running is therapeutic. Going and doing drama, acting in the plays, that's therapeutic. Joining the chess club, that's therapeutic. Having a play date with your cousins down the street, that's therapeutic. But we as folks on the spectrum need so much more downtime and recuperation time. So I love hearing that when people are listening to that and honoring that space that we need.
Yeah, and you're right in that it's I feel like having 4 kids, and Cynthia may feel this too, like, but having 4 kids, I'm also constantly thinking about, okay, like, is this something that I would be asking my other kids to do right now, or is this an expectation that I would have of my other kids? And if the answer is no, then I'm really like, I don't like, just because he has different needs doesn't mean that I have to have this higher expectation, or he has to have less playtime because of his neurology. So I don't like that. And so I think, like, when he was younger and we were kind of unhappy with some therapy, that was kind of like the marker that I was using. It's like, he has a sensory problem with gloves, having gloves on, and his therapist is saying we need to force him to put them on because it's going to be bad for him to have his hands cold. But I would never let my other kids I would never force something on their hands. I would say, you go outside. If you need gloves, come on in. When you're cold, let me know. If not, that's fine. And they figure it out. And so it's like, no, that's not what I would do. So I feel like I've tried to use that as a benchmark too.
Oh my gosh, you're so right, Jenna. It's been a thing for me. Like you mentioned so many things. I really would like to talk to you after. Like the compliance, the eye contact thing, there's so many things. But with having our other kids, like when you mentioned about the cross country, the running team, we all have, it's just natural to have expectations for all your kids. I mean, I think sometimes we, as autistic parent or as parents of autistic individuals, we think that we're so bad because, like you said, well, how terrible I was to assume that he wouldn't want to do it, just because, well, I assumed a lot of things that my kids didn't want to do or would or would not succeed at, or, whatever, for all four of my kids, because I'm just a crazy person, I'm just a human being. and we do that, and so, yes, you want to check yourself and try to be better every day. But at the same time, which, and not that I feel like that you did this, but, we can't be too terribly hard on ourselves either. We're human, once in a while, we're going to get it wrong. And, but you were there, yeah, I'll sign it. Let's go. And now, look at him, and he's cross country, and he's doing great, and he's loving it, and it's working for him. And it's so much about that. It's so like Toni said, it's that example. It's that example within your family, for your son, for your other children, but it's an example for other families, just in general, that, this is us doing our best to meet that every day of, let's give it a try. Everybody doesn't have to be in 5 therapies. Everybody doesn't have to be in 5 sports. What fits, what really fits to have a full life, but not an overly full life.
Well, the other thing is that, as autistic folks, we come into our own development in our own time. And I really encourage parents to trust their children, like have faith that your kid has a sense of what they need. I've been doing this for many years, and for over 30 years now, working with autistic folks. So I've seen these children grow up. And as they become adults and articulate what their experience was, inevitably, they talk about knowing what was the right thing for them to do at any given moment. And on the outside, it might look weird and crazy to somebody who doesn't understand. But for that person, it was purposeful, and it was intentional, and it had meaning and was useful. Whether the other day I had a conversation with my daughter who was very forced with her Barbie play. We had this scripted play that we had to do. We had to do a Harry Potter script. And if I got even one word different, she'd kick at me and scream at me and send me out the door. And she shared with me the other day how helpful that scripted language was in her learning what she needed to process language when she was 11 and 12. And an outsider would have been like, oh, this is terrible. She isn't doing it right. She was doing exactly what she needed to do for her to grow into the woman that she was meant to be today. So I think it's just really important for us to trust our kids and have, that faith that they're going to be okay. They're going to figure it out.
Yeah. I mean, we're not broken neurotypicals. We're perfectly created autistic people.
Exactly.
So
and there's a lot of wisdom in the way that we choose to do things.
Right.
Yeah. So, yeah. And I think it's really important, for parents to give themselves permission to allow their kids to come into that, like these 2 women have done. Because when you give people the space and the time to do that, it's going to turn out all right.
Yeah. And Toni, one thing I think it's important that, and you and I both know this and do it, but, to talk about the missteps and the things that go wrong, and don't just paint this, Brady Bunch kind of picture.
Mm-hmm.
Let them know that, let people know that, hey, you know what, we do have challenges, but they can be overcome and worked around. But life's not just all hunky dory.
Yeah. I mean, we all have the right to make mistakes, to figure things out, and part of the human experience is learning how to deal with the pain. There's disappointment, there's betrayal, there's pain for all humans, because that is part of the human experience. And I know in my family we tried a lot. My mom tried to avoid having me experience any pain at all. Of course, that didn't work out, and I in my young motherhood years tried to do that with my kids, and that's not the goal. The goal is to help our children learn how to how to deal with things, and to be okay with experiencing the gamut of life. There's amazing, wonderful, magical things that happen, and there's really disappointing and sad and painful things, and we all have the right to experience it all.
Yeah, Toni, I can't remember how long a difference was it between the time you were diagnosed and your kids?
So my daughter was diagnosed at 11. She's 27 now. Okay. And then I was like in my 40s, and it was after my daughter got her diagnosis.
Okay. I thought it was.
Yeah. And I'm an autism professional. Like, I've been doing autism for over 30 years and didn't see it.
Yeah, but we see what we want to see sometimes.
So, or what we're able to see,
Yeah. So, all right. Well, we got a couple of minutes. Jenna, your book is coming out again on the 21st. It is available on Amazon and from Jessica Kingsley Publishers, although, I'm not going to say that because I've sent a book to them to be possibly published. So I'm not going to say that in case this ever gets back to anybody. But I appreciated meeting you when we met a few years ago, when you sent me that questionnaire for the website, and the fact that it's turned into a book is just awesome.
Yeah, I'm really pleased that you were able to participate. It was interesting because I started asking people the same question without the intention of it being anything. That's what the question I was so curious with, like, what mistakes do neurotypical autism advocates make? Like, what do we think that we're doing that's so right, and we're so passionate about it, and then we just aren't quite right? And it might not be that we're way off the mark, or it just may be that we're a little off to the side, but how can we better shape that? Because I was just surprised at some of the answers, and then I started asking more people, and then I thought, this is kind of cool what I'm hearing. And then for me, at least, too, I've been searching I search for resources that are just authored by autistic people. And whenever you Google something, you have to, unfortunately, it doesn't matter what you search, you have to go several pages in before you find something that's written by an autistic person. And so that's part of what I do with my website, but I'm like, well, this is going to be a resource for people who want advice that's just coming from autistic people. And then I was even self-conscious about my editorial neurotypical slant. So that's why Jennifer Brunton is in on it too. So she's helped kind of shape this and make sure that it was really as authentic as possible. But yeah, I'm excited about it because I think it's got some things people will be surprised about, and hopefully maybe give them confidence that what they're doing is right too, or is good, or is on the mark.
Yeah.
So,
well, and I'll tell you this, that even before I met you and knew who you were, I knew about the Actually Autistic hashtag, and I do, when I'm going on social media, if I'm looking for certain things or for advice or whatever, I will type that into the search bar.
Yeah, that's a great strategy for families if you're really wanting to get the autistic feedback. And you can type that hashtag, and that will send you to people who are on the spectrum.
Yeah. So just if you're neurotypical, don't use it yourself if you're just by yourself trying to use it for something. But if you're using it as a resource to, search for input, I use it a lot to just read the responses. Yeah.
It filters things really nicely.
Yep. And then Toni, you've got your website, you've got your book.
Yeah. ToniBoucher.net. And you can go on Amazon and get Autism Translated, which it's actually a really nice, I think, sister book to Jenna's book. Because that was
having only read a third of Jenna's book, I can see that.
They're very complimentary.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. And then Cynthia, Echo. Well, but that Echo program,
Yeah.
though, we didn't mention earlier, that's part of the University of Missouri.
Yes, it's the Thompson Center for Autism at the University of Missouri. Dr. Kristen Soul founded it with several colleagues, Alicia Curran being one of those. And it's based off of ECHO, which is a tele-ECHO program to get medical care of different specialties to those in rural and impoverished communities. It's not like telemedicine directly where you converse with the physician. It's where your primary care physician has resources of connecting with specialists and receiving training virtually from a team of experts and specialists so that they can then provide you with all or most of your care. And Dr. Soul saw this method and saw that it could be implemented to provide access to diagnosis for autism in the state. And I couldn't even begin to properly relay all that the program is and does. But I can say, I mean, many people know that it's often years and sometimes multiple clinicians before an individual can receive an appropriate diagnosis, especially the older that they are sometimes, and the less medically typical that they may present. We see it a lot in female. And so the program has been through a couple of different research studies, and I believe is in another one right now, but has been confirmed that they can appropriately and effectively and accurately diagnose autism up to 48 months through ECHO. And then there's a complementary program that goes into adulthood. There are a handful of physicians that are certified. One that I know of is certified to diagnose up to 40 years old. And so it's just a tremendous resource. And I actually learned this week that as of right now, any given child in the state of Missouri should be within 45 miles of an ECHO autism provider. And that is astounding. I don't know if there's another specialty within medicine that could say that.
Toni and Jenna, you don't understand this, but to be within 45 miles in some places in Missouri is a huge thing.
It's so close.
Yeah, I mean, so you live in a town of 2,000. Mine's 4,000. Next to a town of 15,000, and I have to drive 45 miles to get to the 120,000.
Yes, exactly. Very, very rural. Our county, 60% of the population lives below poverty level, and so you can just kind of imagine just the challenges that people have are not always. They don't even really. The challenge doesn't even begin at being able to find a provider that can diagnose. Really, the challenge begins of even being able to appropriately communicate with their family medicine provider their children's milestones. Mm-hmm. And then those providers, we're in a rural area. We're not where most people come to make a big name for themselves in medicine. No. So those providers are often new and not always dedicated to being here for the long term, and things can be missed. And Dr. Soul herself attests to the fact that anyone in medicine gets just a matter of hours worth of exposure to developmental milestones, not even neurodiverse or untypical development. It's just hours. And so very, very few providers, if they haven't sought that out themselves, are equipped to even really properly assess those milestone flags that we need to see. So anyway, I don't want to keep us too long.
No. It's all good. It's all good. So thank you all again. We'll be back next month doing this on the first Friday of the month. And buy her book, and become friends with Cynthia on Facebook. All right. So we'll see you guys next month. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
ladies.